This is an introduction to HTML. In this video, we're going to talk about the uses of HTML and its basic syntax and what you can do with it. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. HTML is not a programming language, it is a markup language. Markup is a method of embedding information to the text that indicates the logical components of a document or provides instructions for how to render the layout that this document was intended to describe, or any other information which can be interpreted by some automatic system. In essence, HTML is a way to describe to the browser how to render a document by embedding commands inside the document. This will become more evident with an example that I'm going to show right away. But before we go on, HTML documents can be read and interpreted by web browsers. That was the intent. Now, HTML documents are supposed to be text documents. They're all written in text. The content of the file is text. So here we have a browser displaying a web page. As you see, there is text and there is a picture and there is some structured text in terms of a list, different types of lists, some text that is bold and some that is not, bigger fonts, smaller fonts, different color fonts, and so on. Now, if we were to look behind this web page, it is displayed in a browser, and we would like to look behind it. We would like to see what kind of code has generated this. So the browser has received an HTML file that it is in fact rendering. This file does not contain this information in the way you see it. In fact, if I do a right click and I say view page source, this is the code that is contained within that file that is actually getting the browser to render all this text. Now, you see, there is over here text that is in fact rendered in the page that you saw earlier, like here. You see, all of this text exists in the coded file. But all of this text is surrounded by so-called HTML tags. You see, there are tags all over the place here. Okay, there are tags all over the place here, which they are enclosed in brackets. So the tags are directives to the browser, and they tell the browser how to render the embedded text. So for example, up here it says that it should render this text to-do list, but render it as a header of type 1. This tag indicates that this is a header of type 1 starting here, and this indicates that that header is ending there. Over here, another tag indicates that right at this point the browser should display an image, the source of which exists right here. Over here, it indicates that blue font should start over here and render everything from there on in blue. So the HTML tags simply indicate how the browser should render things. Right at this tag, a list starts, an ordered list, in fact, starts. Then here you have a list item, which is this, and that list item ends here. Then another list item starts, and it is this, and that list item, the second list item, ends here. Then here an unordered list starts. Unordered list meaning the items are not numbered. They are noted as list items, but they're not numbered. So this tag here indicates a list item that starts. This is the list item. This is the list item ending. And so on. Right here the unordered list ends. Then there is another list item that belongs to the previous ordered list that started up here. And it goes on like that until everything is finished. All of that is what displays these lists. You see you have the ordered list 1, 2, 3, and then the unordered list over here, the picture over here, which I hope you find funny. And then you have a few more things rendering over here. Here is a type 1 heading that we saw with the h1 tag, and so on. So that, I hope, gives you an idea about what HTML does. Tags simply are embedded within the content, the intended content, to describe to the browser how this content is to be rendered. They are not items that the browser will display. You see, none of these tags that we saw is appearing in this rendering because they were intended only to give direction to the browser about what to do with this information. But otherwise, it was not meant to be information that is rendered. So back to our presentation, this is what we mean by a markup language, hypertext markup language. The text document that contains the information is annotated with tags that describe how this document is to be rendered. Now, HTML is not a programming language. Programming languages must have the following very basic abilities. First, they have to have assignment statements, variables and assignment statements. Then, they must have the ability to do if then else statements, conditional statements, and the ability to do looping. HTML has none of these. There are no variables in HTML. And there is no if then else statements, there are no conditional statements, and there is no looping. Now, this is not to say that programming is not possible. You can embed snippets of code in HTML, which means executable code, but that is something that is totally different and separate from HTML. It is possible to embed executable code, but that is not HTML code. In order to create a very simple web page, like the one that we saw earlier, you need the following things. First, you need an HTML editor, which normally should be a text editor. For example, Notepad, WordPad, TextEdit, or Notepad++ are editors that you can use in text mode. Notepad works with Windows. TextEdit should work with Macs. Notepad++ can be downloaded for free, and it is a wonderful text editor. An HTTP browser, it will be required for testing the pages, and any of the current releases of Chrome, Edge, Firefox, and Safari will do. And normally you need a web server on which to store your files and make them available for viewing. Now, this is not absolutely necessary. HTML files, you can have them on your computer, and your browser can load them from your computer. If they were to reside outside your computer, then they would reside in a machine that must run some web server, like Apache, for example, which serves these documents upon request. So to recap, HTML consists of a set of commands that are called tags because they're not commands like the ones that we know for regular programming languages. They're simply directives. These tell the browser how to display the information provided in the page. They are always enclosed in angle brackets. So when the browser sees an angle bracket pair, an opening and a closing one, it considers everything that is in between these brackets to be a tag. Sometimes a browser, depending on what type of browser it is, may understand the tag, and in some cases it may not. You could, if you just wanted to try, open these pair of angle brackets and type something that is totally gibberish in between those brackets. In other words, something that is not really a tag, and see what the browser is going to do. What you're going to see is that the browser is going to ignore it. Anything that is within angle brackets supposed to be a tag, the browser considers it to be a directive. It will do what it says if it understands it. If it does not understand it, it will simply ignore it as if it didn't exist. It won't even render it, it will simply ignore it. Browsers are very forgiving when it comes to the interpretation of HTML. So tags are embedded within the text of a file, and they're not case sensitive. So you can type them either in lowercase or in uppercase, but if you would like to be consistent with XHTML or XML, then it's best to be consistent and use all lowercase, because XHTML and XML are case sensitive, and we're going to look at those things later. We are now in HTML version 5, and there are some minor differences between version 5 and the previous version 4.01. The differences are not that big. There are some new tags in HTML5, such as, for example, canvas, that allows you to draw, data list, which helps the inputs by allowing a user to select from a drop-down list for inputs. And there are many tags that are still the same, and some are gone. Like, for example, applet and center and big and frame and so on. These are gone, but there are alternative ways to achieve what they could do. One of the highlights in form validation, the required attribute does basic form checking for you at this time. What does this mean? If you are wondering, forms are a way that users can communicate information to a browser. And often we would like to make sure that a user has in fact entered some required information. This checking, doing this checking that in fact input has been provided and it is proper, is called validation. And that used to be a bit difficult to do because it required going over a few hoops and checking for the information. That required a little bit of coding and embedding coding into HTML, or doing this by writing code for the server. But now the required attribute helps you do validation right at the browser level. If this sounds Greek to you, don't worry about it. It will become evident soon. So what exactly is new in HTML5? In summary, well, we have vector graphics. It is possible to allow media and manipulate media in a much easier fashion, both audio and video. Flash is gone, but we now have Canvas and SVG. Storage is new. You are allowed to use application cache, you can use index database, and web storage. There are some tags that make a few things easier, like Canvas, for example. And if you like to take a look at some references with very good overviews, these links will provide that overview very well, I think. The tag syntax. Generally, tags come in two parts, a opening part and a closing tag, or a beginning tag and an ending tag. For example, this indicates the beginning of HTML markup text. This indicates the end of that text. This matches this. The one with a slash always matches the one that was opened last before it. Most tags also support various attributes. For example, some tag, now this is not exactly a tag, but this is a reference to any tag, can have attributes. Like, for example, some attribute will be a certain value. For example, a font tag has properties that indicate exactly what font. Verdana or Calibri or Times Roman or what else. Also, the size. What kind of size font do we want? So a font tag indicates that font is going to be defined, and attributes define the various parameters that are desired for that particular tag. Appearance of the web page depends also on the specific browser settings and the user system and monitor. For example, a user can select the particular default font size that the browser will be selecting, or a user may resize his or her browser to certain size, and different people may use different size browsers. So the same information trying to be rendered on different size windows is going to be rendered differently in most cases. So at the moment, all you need to keep in mind is that the appearance of the web page depends on the specific preferences that the user has specified on the browser. One other good example is the selection of the default font, or the existence of a font altogether. Say, for example, I would like to display a text in a font that is very specific, and I went to lengths to either make it or download it, but it's not a common font. So if I try to specify that I'd like something rendered in that font, and I give this document to a browser that exists on a computer that does not have that font, then that font cannot be displayed. It would have to be substituted with the defaults of that particular browser. We now turn to the HTML tags, the description, and their specifications. The specification for the HTML can be found in the w3.org website, and you can find there older as well as the newest specifications. Browsing through this, you will find the table of contents that describe the various parts of HTML and its syntax. For example, over here there is a quick introduction to HTML. It indicates how a basic page might look like. Let me very quickly run down what's over here and what it is that we see. The very first tag indicates the type of the document. This is an HTML document. It might be text, it might be binary, it might be other things, but this is going to be an HTML document. The HTML tag that we see here indicates the beginning of the HTML document, and it has a corresponding closing tag over here. In between those two tags, there is HTML code, markup code. There is a header part that starts here and ends here, and the only thing that contains is a title. Then there is a body part which contains a heading, and then it contains a paragraph which has a link to a particular other page and some text, and it contains a comment. This is all it contains. Now, let's see what this would look like on a browser. I'm going to copy this, and then I'm going to use Notepad and paste it in there. Now I'm going to save this file on my computer, and I'm going to give it a name, HTML example, and I'm going to give it an extension HTML instead of a standard TXT. There. Now, going into the folder where I saved this file, as you see, this is a HTML file that can be opened with a browser, and if I double click on this to open it, then this is what I get. This is the rendering of that HTML file as a web page. And as you see, it has a heading in bold and bigger font called sample page, and then it has this text over here where this part is in fact a link, a clickable link. Going back to the code, this is the heading that we had, and this is the text with this part here being the link. The word simple is designated as a link. It is enclosed within an anchor tag that starts here and ends there, and with an attribute it specifies what document is being referenced. This is a comment which is not rendered. It's just a comment, it exists there, but the browser does not render it because of this tag that ends here. Looking at another example, there is some HTML code over here which I am going to copy and paste it into my original file. I'm going to copy it right here. I'm going to save the file, and now I'm going to go back to the browser and I will reload the browser. I will reload the file, and look what I get. I get this thing that I added there, which has text in varying font. Let me make it bigger for you. There you go. So this one is like the rest, but this one is italics. This one is italics and bold. Looking at the code again, these tags specify how this text is to be rendered. This specifies that it's a paragraph. A new paragraph starts there. That's why it's on a new line. This one is emphasis, and this is strong emphasis. And then here is where they end. The emphasis ends here, and then the bold, the strength, ends here. The basic tag types are document tags that identify the various parts of the document, such as, for example, the header or the body. There are tags that specify the structure of text and the layout of the text. There are style tags that tell the browser how to display the text. There are tags that manipulate images that indicate where images need to be rendered and how. And there are anchor tags which create hyperlinks, clickable items that may lead to other documents or the loading of new websites. The document tags do not have an end tag. They simply specify what type of document is coming. It tells the browser what is coming. There may be HTML or XML, strict, transitional, and so on. Because so far we've seen references to XML and XHTML, let me explain that XML stands for Extensible Markup Language and XHTML stands for Extensible HTML. These are more strict standards than HTML. It started with XML, which was a markup language for data transportation. In other words, passing data that are marked up to specify what its part is. For example, an address would be some text that consists of a street address part. It consists of a zip code. It consists of a city. It consists of state. So rather than passing all this text in a lump block, it is possible to send this text but enclose the various parts in tags that mark what its part is. That was XML, and was specified in order to store and transport data in a structured way. XHTML is similar, and it's HTML with extensible tags. Now, if no document type exists, the browser assumes HTML. XHTML requires a doc type, and for HTML5 it is just doc type HTML. The document tags consist of the following. HTML is a tag that specifies the beginning and end of the HTML file. Header tags indicate which part of the whole document is meant to be a header. Typically, this is a part of the document that is not displayed in the browser's window, and it includes a whole bunch of other tags that do certain bookkeeping and specify certain attributes of the document. For example, the title tag. It provides a title that does not render in the browser. You can still see it, but it's not rendered in the browser. So for example, in this document, we had a title that's called sample page. But since this text is the same as this one, it might be confused, so let me change this. So I'm going to change this, I'm going to save it, and then go back to the browser and reload it. And now you see that the header is specified as this is a sample page, like we had right here for the header part. This title part, just the sample page, does not seem to appear anywhere. It actually does. If you look at the tab for this file, it appears right here. This one is the title of the page and appears on the browser tab, but does not appear anywhere else in the rendering of the document. Meta tags specify information that is placed in a web page which is not intended for the users to see, but instead typically passes information to a search engine or to the browser software and other applications. For example, there might be a meta tag specifying what kind of information this website contains. And here's an example. These are meta tags. They are self-contained because they do not have an opening and a corresponding closing part. But they do have attributes. The attribute that this one has is the name. A certain string provides a value for that attribute, and then there is another attribute called content, which specifies values for that content. In this particular case, we have a meta tag that specifies keywords that are pertinent to this particular document, and those particular keywords that we desire the document to be associated with are given over here as a comma-separated list. There is another meta tag over here that is called description, and the value for the content of this is some text of the sort "this page is about blah blah blah." This meta tag provides a refresher. It specifies that this page should be refreshed every 5 seconds. The body tags simply indicate the part of the document that is supposed to be displayed in the browser's window. Now, that does not mean that you may not have different tags that are not renderable in other parts. It generally indicates the practice that we follow with a header part containing information and directives and the body indicating the part that is supposed to be rendered. So this example, if rendered, it's going to render as follows. Going back here, I'm going to paste the code over here and save it, and now I'll go for the rendering where I reload it, and here is what it displays. As you see, it does not display any of the meta tags, it only displays the text, which was just this. There is also a title over here, which, as you see, it appears up here on the browser tab. Comments. The comment feature provides you with a way to document your HTML files and make notes to yourself or other programmers that you may be sharing the file with, and it's only there to act as just notes which will be ignored by the browser and will not be rendered. The basic form is like this. You have this opening part and this closing part. Anything that is between these will not be rendered. Now, you cannot include any embedded HTML code in commented text because the results are unpredictable. For example, if I try to put some other HTML over here or any other comment that closes prematurely this tag, then all of this can result into a spectacular mess. Headings are specified by the H tag, where X over here is a number that runs from 1 to 6. The smaller the X, the larger the text. So H1 would be the largest and H6 will be the smallest type of heading. Going back to our example, I'm going to copy and paste this a couple of times but I'm going to change these to different numbers. So saving this file and going back to the rendering, this is what I get. This is the type 1 heading, this is a type 2 heading, this is a type 3 heading. As you see, the larger the index number, the smaller the font becomes. A paragraph simply starts a new paragraph. A blank line is inserted before the paragraph, and it's nice for applying styles to particular paragraphs of text. There is also a BR or line break tag, which is like the paragraph, but it does not insert a blank line before the break. The BR is needed because browsers ignore white spaces. For example, spaces or tabs or even line breaks are generally ignored by browsers. And let me explain what I mean. Let's go back to our previous example here. And let's say I want to put over here some text. So as you see, I have put line breaks, but they're completely ignored. Also, let's say I go over here and I put a whole lot of spaces. And here I put a whole lot of spaces. Save this, go back and refresh this, and nothing has changed. The reason is that while one space will be rendered, multiple spaces or multiple white characters, such as, again, tabs or line breaks, will not render. The browser is immune to them somehow. This is, in a way, designed on purpose because it allows you to maybe structure test for your own review, like in blocks of different code or different segments, but without making that evident in the browser. So if you want a break, then you have to introduce either paragraph or break tags. For example, if I go over here and I put a paragraph, and I go over here and I put a break, and I go over here and put another break, then saving the file, going back to the rendering, and reloading this file, you see now the text has been broken. Right here, there is a paragraph, and here is the break, and here is a break. Still, the spaces are not rendered. The way to render the spaces, and I'm running ahead a little bit over here, is to indicate that you want a non-breaking space. That is specified with some special HTML elements that we're going to see later on, but for the moment, let me just put one over there. The NBSP indicates that I want a non-breaking space rendered there. And of course, I can replicate this as many times as I want. And if I do that, then refreshing this page now has multiple spaces shown over there. So as you see, the browser renders the text, it follows the directives, but it also has a mind of its own. Let me show you something else. I'm going to resize this browser, and notice what happens. When I am resizing the browser window that is, the rendering of the text changes. Now I didn't specify any breaks of that sort, but the browser automatically does that in order to fit everything that it's supposed to render within the browser window. And that is something that should remind us an earlier situation where I said that the way a browser renders things may depend on defaults from the user or the browser window. So it's not going to display the same on a large screen or on a cell phone because the windows are different. Now, we have ways to control that, and we're going to talk about that later. But for now, just remember that the browser may have a mind of its own. Lists. We saw these tags earlier. They specify the beginning of ordered lists, and they have a closing tag to specify the end, and there are corresponding unordered lists. Example. Here is a document that contains H1 headers, paragraphs, H3 headers, paragraphs, with multiple spaces that are going to be ignored, and breaks and other paragraphs as well. So let me copy this code and go back to my working file and paste it there. So if I save this file and I go back to my rendering browser and I refresh the page, then this is what is rendered. This is the header. This is the other header. This is a paragraph, and this is the last paragraph. Notice that the spaces were completely ignored. Also notice that there is a break in this line. However, this break does not appear in this. As a matter of fact, this break right here is only accidental because of the browser size. And if I was to change the browser size, you see that it really is not there. The text flows continuously as if there was no break at all. This is an example of an unordered list. The UL indicates an unordered list. It starts with the UL tag, and it has a corresponding closing tag to indicate where the list ends. This particular tag may have a type attribute that indicates how the items are going to be marked. In this particular case, a disk or bullet is going to be used as opposed to a square. List items are specified by li opening tags and closing tags. This is going to be rendered as follows. There is an unordered list with a first item and second item as list items, and is specified right here. This is how it would render. This one is similar, except that it has a type attribute specified to be a square, and so the list items are actually shown with square markings. So you can omit the type attribute, in which case the default will be used, which is going to be the disk, or you can specify that you want a square. Ordered lists are using the tag pair OL and corresponding closing one. Again, each item in the list is specified by the li tags, and there may be a type attribute for the ordered list that indicates how exactly the items are going to be marked. A type I will use uppercase Roman numerals. Type I lowercase will be a lowercase Roman numerals. The A will be uppercase Latin letters, and the lowercase a indicates lowercase Latin letters. A start attribute can change where the lists begin the numbering and specify different numbering. For example, a start equals 3 starts the numbering from 3 instead of 1, and a start equals B starts the numbering from B instead of A. For example, here's an ordered list, and there is no type attribute here. Therefore, the default is used, and regular numbering is in fact used. I may have nested lists. Both ordered and unordered lists can be nested. This can be done by starting a new list before the current list has ended. There is no limit to the number of levels of nesting, and you can use indenting in the source code to distinguish between each level of nesting. However, remember that indenting, which is going to be done using white spaces such as blank spaces or tabs, will be completely ignored by the browser. The browser does not use those indentations, and they're only there for your own use and understanding. Here's an example of nested lists. There is an ordered list over here of type A, list items. Right here there is another list starting, an unordered list with its own list items. This is where it ends. Then another list item that corresponds to the previous list starts here, and then an unordered list starts over here, and another unordered list starts here, embedded in all of them until it ends. Now let's see how this would render in our test file. So here's my test code again, and as you see, all of these tabs are there for my visualization of the lists, but the browser is going to ignore them. Now saving this file and rendering it renders this. So I have my ordered list over here and the embedded unordered lists. Although something is wrong here, I had a type A list that does not appear. So this is a good example for how something can go wrong. These quotes are not right. So I'll need to change them to these quotes, because otherwise they confuse my browser. So save this and then go back to my browser, refresh, and now as you see, the ordered list is using ABCs as it was supposed to. And this one is using disks as opposed to circles. Also, as you see, the embedded lists are using different markings by default. So this one is using circles, this one is using squares. I can change that by controlling the type attribute, but I just wanted to make sure that you understand that the browser will use its own defaults to render things if you do not specify in particular how you want something displayed. Here are the basic tags that allow you to style text. So we have the italics, the tag for boldface, the tag for underlining, and there used to be a center tag which is gone in HTML5, and there are other tags to do this. Now, the fact that it is gone in HTML5 doesn't mean that it's not going to work. It's just that in the specification of the HTML5, it does not exist anymore. The EM for emphasis is emphasizing text, and the strong emphasis is providing strong emphasis text. There is also a tag for reducing the font size or making it bigger. There is a, which is also gone in HTML5. There is a tag for specifying addresses, and you need the break tag to separate address lines. This renders an address in a special rendering. There is also the strike through, is also gone in HTML5, and the subscripts and superscripts tags. Let's go to our test file and put in address tags some address. The BR specifies the breaking of the line, and see how it renders. So it renders like this. Here I have added some math type of text with subscripts. The 1, 2 is supposed to be a subscript, and the 3, 4 is supposed to be a superscript. Let's see how it renders. So it renders like this. Links, otherwise typically known as hyperlinks, because they provide links to other documents. The anchor tag opens like this and closes like this, specifies some text, whatever appears wherever the dots are, as a link. So the text will be rendered according to the specification that you have put over here, which may include other HTML for styling, and that whole thing is going to appear as a link, which when you click, you will load a new document. The new document that will be loaded has to be specified as an attribute to the opening tag. The attribute is the href or hyper reference, and within these quotes you're supposed to have a URL, which is going to be some web address. So this text here, designated as clickable text, will appear as intended, and it is going to be a link which, when it's clicked, it is going to bring up or load this URL into the document. There are different ways that the URL may be specified. It may be specified with an HTTP URL, which indicates an external URL address that may reside in any server anywhere in the world, or it can be specified as relative to the current page. So this one over here indicates that there is a subfolder, which is, or a subdirectory, which is at the same place where the file that we have just loaded exists. And under this directory, there is another HTML page specified over here, and that is the one that's been referenced here. So this one is relative to the current document that has been loaded into the browser. This one with the two dots in front of it indicate, again, relative addressing, but it allows you to go up one directory to the parent directory from the one you have loaded the current page that is loaded into the browser and displays this link. So you go up, and then in that parent directory you're looking for this HTML file. This dot dot is a Linux navigation standard in the Linux file system, and we're going to see a lot of it later on. So to recap, this one is a file in the same folder. This one is a file in a child folder called folder name, and this one is a file in the parent folder. Now, it is important that the folder structure on your local machine matches the one in your web account, because if you are going to upload this file and all the supporting files on a server, if you're using structures like this, then these are going to refer now to the structures on the server, and therefore the structure that you have specified on your local computer when you built this has to match the file structure on the server. To see this visually, let's assume that this big box here indicates a folder or directory on the machine that is hosting this HTML web page that is currently loaded onto the browser, and that inside this directory or folder there are two other directories, one that is called images and another one that is designated as CMPS294. Now assume that this directory contains a file called homework3.html, and this directory contains a file called homework2.jpg. So this one here is obviously an image file. It contains a picture, should be a binary file. This one is an HTML file. It's going to be a text file containing HTML to be rendered. So let's assume that for the moment we have loaded the file main.html, which exists in this directory, onto the browser, and that this file specifies a link to the file homework3.html. Since this one exists in a subdirectory, you need to specify the path cmps294/homework3.html. Now, this file, when loaded, it may refer to this picture that is in this directory. Therefore, from here, in order to point to this directory, in order to point to this file, you will need to go up one level to the parent directory and then specify from there the path images/homework2.jpg. Going back to our working file, I have introduced over here a link that specifies that this text is going to be a link to this file, which is in a directory called CMPS294, which is inside the directory that contains this current file, the one that has been loaded here. And in there, in this directory, you should be looking for this HTML file. So this will be rendered like this. So link to homework 3. So you see, it is in fact a link. Now if I click this, it's not going to go anywhere because this doesn't exist. But this is how it would appear. This is how it should be referenced. Now, if I want to go to my, to include an image from this file, I will have to simply refer to the images directory and then this file. But from here, if I have loaded this, I would have to go one directory up and then go down this way. So this would look something like this. Dot dot means up, then images directory, and then a file in that directory, like this. And since we are at it, let's just include some styling HTML over here. Let's make this one bold, and then end the bold right there, like this. Save the file, then go back to our test file, reload, and now you see this one became bold. You must use absolute references, that is full URLs with the HTTP and everything, when you are referring to items or resources that are residing on other servers. Relative addresses can be used only when you're referring to files that are in the same server from where the current document that is displaying has been loaded. Now, do not use absolute references to items in your local directory structure, because using relative references will make your site less portable to other domains. If you were to move the HTML page that is referencing resources on your machine or your local directory structure, then all those references will no longer be valid, because they will be relative to whatever machine you have moved this file to. Mail to links. The anchor tag and the href, the hyperreference attribute, can be used to reference the email protocol. So in general, this looks like this. So you have an anchor tag that indicates a link starting here and ending there. So the text name will appear as a link, except that the reference to it is going to be specified by this part, which no longer is an HTTP URL. Recall that URLs generally specify the protocol to be used. So HTTP, which stands for Use the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, indicate the regular URL addresses. But in this case, there is a mail to in the place of HTTP. So this indicates that the mail protocol is going to be used. And of course, after that, what follows is an email address. So example, let's say we have this HTML code. That will render like this. So the part that's in here, send email to Chris, will be rendered, and it will appear as a hyperlink, except that when you click the hyperlink, instead of loading a new page, what's going to happen is the mail to protocol is going to be recognized, and the browser is going to spawn the mailer, the default designated mailer, on the local machine, on the local computer, and it will open an email addressed to this email address. Anchor tags can also be used for intra-document linking. So you can specify that a hyperlink just jumps the user to a particular location in the current page. This is done like this. You can have an anchor like this, which only provides an ID. So it's using this ID as an attribute and provides a way to identify this particular anchor. This employment history text will become then a point of reference. Note that in HTML4, the attribute that would do this was called name. And then you can reference that location in the document, in the current document, like this. You have an anchor with a hyperreference to the name or the designation for that anchor. It's preceded by this hash over here. And so what this is going to do is going to render the text employment as a link, and when clicked, you will be moved to the same file, but in a view in which this will then be visible. You can link to an anchor in another document by specifying the name of that document. Now, obviously, this means that this document, resume HTML, resides in the same location, in the same directory as the file, the HTML file that the browser is currently displaying. So in that file, you're going to be transferred to that particular location, which is the identifier for this tag. Let's go back to our test file. And what I've done over here is that I have added this anchor as shown in the presentation, and then after that there is some text. Now up here what I have done is I added this hyperreference, and so the go to employment should appear as a link that should take me to the spot identified by this ID right here. So looking at it in the browser, this is how it renders. Go to employment. And if I click on it, then I get to a place in the file that makes this visible. The target attribute. So in an anchor tag, we already talked about the hyperreference attribute, but there is another attribute which is optional and specifies the target for where this is going to appear. This is if you would like the target to be loaded not in the current window, but in a new window. So this identifier over here can be anything you want, but it will give a name for referencing whatever browser window or frame that is going to load this. The target can be blank, so it loads the page in a new blank browser window. It can be the same window, or it can be a parent window. Now let's talk a little bit about this parent part. Let's say I have an HTML page which had a link that targeted a new window, and a new window was opened. The current window, which spawned the new one, is the parent of the new one. So in the new window there may be a link, and if the target is specified as the parent, then clicking on that link is going to load the target into the parent window, or it can load it in the full browser window. Back to our example. Let's consider the original file that we were seeing. This file exists on a server, and this is the URL for it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to link it to my example file. So right here, I'm going to insert an anchor with hyperreference to that file, and put another paragraph there. So I'll save this, go back to my test file here, and reload it. So now I have an external link, which if I click, I go to this file that was on the server. Now, let's go back to this and go back to our example file and put another attribute over here. I will add the attribute the target is something new. Now, saving this and going back to my original file and reloading it, I have the same link over here. It doesn't look like any different than, it does not look any different than before, but if I click on it now, then I have a new window that has loaded this. This was my original one. This one is the new window on which this target was loaded. Image files. You can specify an image as a resource to be included in the rendering of a web document. And the most common formats that we have are the GIF and the JPEG. Now, there are other formats, the PNG, Portable Network Graphics, and other newer formats, but the GIF and the JPEG are the most common ones. The GIF displays art in a maximum of 256 colors, and it is possible to create animated graphics with the GIF format that looks like video. It's just a bunch of different GIF files that are packed in one, and they can be displayed in a sequence, thereby appearing as an animated graphic. The GIF files specify pixel values, brightness and color and what have you, that are given as a reference to a certain palette that is specified with the file. And that palette cannot contain any more than 256 colors. That is why GIF files generally do not appear as smooth. They're smaller files, but they do not have a very good gradation in the colors. The JPG files display photographs. They can have an arbitrary number of colors. And in order to reduce the image file, it's using some sort of compression. So this math indicates the way that pixel values are encoded. It is not part of this course to go over the formats of image graphics, but it is only explained here for the purposes of continuity. Images are referenced in a document by using the image tag. An inline image is a picture file that is referenced in the HTML code, and it is loaded with the HTML file. Now, this does not have to reside in the same place as the file that you are getting from the server. It may reside on any web server anywhere in the world. Generally speaking, the image file that you are asking must have appropriate permissions for the web server to serve it to a third party. For those of you who are familiar with the Linux systems, an image file or any file that will be referenced by a web document has to be able to be presented to a third party, in other words, a party or an application that has privileges to see the file, and therefore that means that a 644 permission will be required at least. We will talk more about this part later, but for now I'm referencing it so that we can make the connection later. So if you do not understand this part, or if it sounds Greek to you, don't worry. The image tag is this one, img, and it has an attribute src, standing for source, that specifies which is the computer file that contains that image. In this particular case, there is a file called photo.jpg, and it is located in the same directory as the file that the browser is currently trying to display. Of course, like before, you may have a photograph or an image residing at a different location, in which case you would have to specify the path in front of it, or in another server, in which case you would need to specify this file with its whole URL, meaning the HTTP protocol, and then followed by the domain name, path, and the file name. Along with an image, you can specify, using different attributes, other properties that you would like to reference with this image. So you may display this image in a particular height or width, with or without a border, and what size. And you can also specify some text that may be displayed whenever a browser is unable to display that particular picture, either because it is some weird kind of format that it doesn't understand, or because the picture doesn't exist where you think it should be, or because it's taking too long for it to load, and in the meantime something has to be displayed in its place. So that is the alternative. Now, a few things to remember. You do not need to specify any of these attributes, in which case the image is going to be rendered in its original form and original dimensions. You can specify just the height, in which case the image will be rendered in a resized manner to match the height in terms of pixels that you have specified. The width of the image is going to be resized proportionally to match the height if a width attribute has not been specified. Or you can specify both the height and the width and distort the image as you like. Let's go back to our example files. So this picture, and I'm not going to specify any attributes at the moment. I'm going to save the file and then render it. Oops, I forgot to terminate the quotes right there. I need to save it and then I'll go render it. There you go. Now, this is a huge picture, and so as you see, it displays in its original size. So what I will do now is I'll go back to my file and I will specify height attribute. So height will be, say, 300 pixels and nothing else. Save the file again and then go back and reload the file. And now reloading the file, you see the picture has become smaller. It only has 300 pixels height. The width has also been resized to be proportional to the height, and it's still very big. So I can go and make it smaller, or just specify that the width is 300, then go back to my file, reload, and now you see the picture is resized to fit a 300 pixel width and is proportionally resized. Now I can go back and specify a height as well, which I will make it 200, like that, save the file, go back to my rendering, refresh, and now you see I have the file resized. Now it is not very obvious here because the dimensions are actually pretty close to being proportional to the original, but I can go and make this one, say, 200, make this one 300, save the file, go back to my rendering, and reload, and now you see the file has been fit within the dimensions that I specified. Obviously it is distorted, but my point, I hope, is made that I can control the dimensions of the rendering of the file, and if I specify both, then I can distort it. If I specify only one, the other one will be proportionally adjusted. Anchors can be used to hyperlink images instead of text because, as I said earlier, the part that is within the anchor can be HTML. So in this case, we have HTML which specifies an image. So this now can be a clickable image, which is a link that's going to bring up something else. For example, I go back to my original file. I'll make this one a 100 pixels. I'll take out the width to make sure I don't have any distortion. And I'm going to make this one a link. So I'm going to add an anchor tag, and the hyper reference is going to be referring to, say, this website for Visit Greece, and then I'm going to end the tag right here. Now, what is this doing is it's displaying this image, but it is displaying it as a link, which when clicked, it will lead me to this website right here. So saving the file, going back to my image file, reloading it. So now I have the image displaying at the smaller size like I did. And if I hover over it, you see it is now a link. And if I click this, then I'm going to go to the target site, which is here. All right. One thing to understand is that when I manipulate the height and width attributes, I am changing the rendering of the picture, but I'm not changing its size, which means how many bytes of it will come from the server to the browser. Manipulating the width and height tags does not change that. The whole file, the whole picture file, will come down. It will have to be transported over the internet and come down to my browser. It's just that the browser will then try to fit it within the dimensions that I have specified. So this is not the same as resizing an image file for faster transport. Okay, that's not the same at all. The body tag has attributes that allow you to specify styles for the body of the rendering. So for example, you can specify that the text in the website is going to appear as black, or that the background color may be whatever you choose, and there might be a background tiling, so a particular image will tile to appear as a background in tiled format. Now, these are very basic styling tricks, but we're going to see later that there are different ways to style text and other attributes of the web document that are known as cascaded style sheets, or CSS for short. But that is to be covered later. Incidentally, I should say that CSS provides much more control to how the document is displayed, because as you saw earlier, when I was resizing the browser size, things were changing, the rendering was changing. And so because of the need to have more control in how browsers render content, the need for more advanced techniques known as the CSS style sheets were developed. But that is something that we're going to see later on. Going back to my working file, I can go into the body tag and I specify an attribute that text will be red. And then I can save this and go back to my rendering. And you see now that all the text that was black before is now red, except from the links, which are blue because they are links, although I can still control that one as well. Tables. Tables are an early trick to display content of a web document in a specific format. So you can specify a table which has different cells and what is rendered within those cells. Because the cells of a table have a specific geometric arrangement relative to each other, it was possible to arrange how things are going to appear by using tables. So a table is specified by the table tag, and within the table tags you're going to have table rows for specifying rows and table data which specify cells within the rows. There are certain attributes that the table and the table data can have, which specify how many columns are spanned or how many rows are spanned and the size of a cell. Taking these in the simplest form, we observe the following. A table tag is opened here and it ends over here. So there is a table specified within this region. The tr specifies a table row, and the td specifies a table cell. So this specifies a table cell that contains the text A1, then another table cell containing the text A2, and another table cell containing the text A3 is specified here, and then the table row is ended. And another one starts with, again, table data with text B1, B2, and B3 until the table row ends, and then the table ends. So here you see the rendering of this table with the elements specified here arranged like this. Now notice that the first table data element, the first cell, is this one, and then the next one is the one right next to it, to the right, and the third one is to the right of the second one. Then after a new table row has started, the table cells start unfolding in the same sequence. Therefore, the very first column is this table data and this table data. The second one is this and this, and the third one is this and this. So there is a row over here. This is the first row as noted here, and this element and this element is the first column with the rest of them following. A few final notes. HTML is very forgiving. Well, actually, browsers that interpret the HTML are quite forgiving. And often, if you do not follow something very strictly, you can still get away with it. For example, when you have to put a value in quotes, like here. Over here you have a tag specifying a font color. The font tag specifies that you are manipulating the font of anything that follows, and the color attribute indicates that you want the font to be blue. But you can write it this way too, without the quotation marks. It will still work. But the problem is, when you have a text string that contains a space, that's going to be a problem if it is not in quotation marks. For example, this one says light blue, but there is a space, and it's going to be wrong. This is right. In quotation marks, the space is not going to be construed as a break or a delimiter. On designing, this is a matter of style. It has nothing to do with HTML itself, but you should make sure that whatever you're making renders properly in different web browsers, and particularly the most widely used ones, such as Chrome, Microsoft Edge, Firefox, and Safari. Make sure that your website displays properly in at least a 1024 by 768 and widescreen resolutions. Also, try to make your website not seem very cluttered or very busy. Don't try to put too much in very little space. Stick to a constant formatting style for all the pages making up your website so that uniformity is evident and it is easier to navigate, because once a user has figured out how to navigate your website, then that should work still for other pages in the website. Do not place very large pictures, and especially don't do it on your initial page. The reason is that large pictures take a long time to download. And while internet these days is faster, and it is getting much faster and might not be a problem, still you may have people who are having weak connections or not very speedy ones. Some are also maybe using cell phones, and they're viewing a web page over data networks that may not be as fast, or they may have quotas. So if a page takes too long to load, then users might just as well move away and go somewhere else. So we have concluded this part of Introduction to HTML, and thank you for your attention.